and Lucci. We're a bit of a smaller round today, but that's perfectly fine. I think we'll have enough things to say. Something I wanted to kind of bring up today was this idea that there's a lot of kind of buzzwords when it comes to being a Scrum Master, right? If you've never heard of it and you tell your friends, I'm a Scrum Master, they first ask what that is, and then you try to explain it, and you talk about refinements and retros and sprints and story points, and the more you explain, the less they seem to understand, right? So we have a lot of kind of these ideas that are very specific to what we do. And one of those words that gets thrown around a lot and a concept we use a lot is, story points, right? But what I realized was that, the project I'm in, it has 6 teams. And I don't think 2 of those teams have the same understanding of what story points are. And I think if you ask 2 different members or 2 different developers in that team what it really means when we use story points and to explain the concept behind it, they would also kind of have different ideas, right? So it's an estimation of some sort, but is it time? Is it complexity? Is it a kind of a range? Why do we use the Fibonacci sequence? I thought it might be good today to kind of hammer down, like, are even the 4 of us in agreement on what a story point is and how it's meant to be used? So does someone have any experience of saying, I know exactly what a story point is, or is it flexible between teams? And what do we even really mean when we as integral agilists say story points, and why we use story points?
This has always been kind of a funny one to me, because it seems like such an interesting, or rather not interesting, but simple concept on the face of it. We talk about relative sizing, and it's like, oh, okay, well, is this bigger than this? And that's really the entire idea behind story points, and people just don't seem to understand. I've gotten so many weird ideas around story points, things like, the whole purpose of this is to disassociate the work from a concept of time. But people just keep pulling it back to that. Like, okay, we're going to start our sprint. Every developer gets 8 points. Nobody can have more than 8 points. Really? So your tech lead is taking the same 8 points as your most junior developer? Is that what you're saying the idea is here?
So why it is a bit absurd, and we can dig into those differences. But why do you think people always go back to time, Leo? Why do you think people feel this need to equate a story back to? I see it where it's like, okay, well, this story is 5 story points, but a story point is a day, so we might as well write on the front, this story is 5 days. Why do people do that?
If I can come back to you there, though, I think there's 2 things, right? Because if we're working with people who we're hiring as outside consultants, we're paying them by time, right? And then if I'm a product owner and I want to get something done, I want to know when the ticket's going to be done. I don't really necessarily care how difficult it was for you to do it or how complex the task was, right? That's what matters in terms of being able to plan, right?
Yeah. So there is an element, I think we all agree, there is an element of forecasting, which is useful. And I think that to answer the story, when is my story done? Probably at the end of the sprint. That's what the official answer would be. If you're talking about when is the epic done, or when is several stories done, then we might use velocity to kind of forecast how long something is going to take when it's several sprints in length. But intra-sprint, why do people keep going back to, you've got 8 days, you've got 8 story points, and story point is a day, like inside of a sprint? Why is that? Why do people care?
It's anxiety based. They're not. The whole purpose of Agile is to become data driven, right? Or a part of it is to take things that exist in disparate ideas in various different people's heads and say, okay, well, we're going to acknowledge that we can't predict the future. And any attempt we make at trying to say when something's going to be done is invariably going to be wrong. So we'll take some kind of an abstract idea and say, okay, great. So let's say this is a 5-point story, and the average 5-point story takes somewhere between 4 and 6 days to complete, or 3 and 5 days to complete, or whatever that time frame is. And that's how you measure it. You say to somebody, how long does it take you to run 4 miles? It takes me a different amount of time than it takes you, but you don't know how long it takes until you make that run. And where you make that run is going to be very different if you're just running straight on some pavement or you're running on some winding mountain trail, right? If you think of a story as like a different type of way that you're running that distance every time, people just, they need that illusion of control. They need that some way to predict forward instead of just letting the process run and allowing the data to come in such a way that you go, okay, well, it'll be between these two dates. You know, I think people have difficulty living in that, in the real world where things are unknown.
Is that then, you know, you say control, but is it trust? Like the person who's asking for a time, or the person who's asking for a number of story points which equate to a number of days, is that because they want to hold people accountable? They don't trust them? You said this was 5 points. I thought that was 5 days, and now you've been 7 days. You should work harder.
It's possible. That's a part of it. I don't know that that's a core part of it though, because I think that if you just allowed this process to run, right, you'd end up with, if you actually did relative estimation, you would end up with a single, you know, let's say you constrained 8 points. Anything bigger than an 8 is not going to fit in the sprint, so we'll split it, right? And the reason why I like to do it this way is anything that's 8 times bigger than this is probably not going to fit into 10 days, 10 working days, if we're doing a 2-week sprint. So yeah, you'll have some 3s that take longer than 5s with this kind of plus or minus thing. But if you just allow this to run, you'll get a sense of when things are basically going to be done. And then you could relax around those ideas. And trust might be a part of it. I don't know. I think of it more as control.
Yeah, I was about to say the exact same thing. I think it's a sense of control, right? I think it's also the kind of people who are expected. I mean, the kind of people who would want story point estimates to reflect times, and the kind of people who, you know, need these estimates, like let's say the POs or the project managers, right? They're the kind of people who are being pressured to be in control of a project and deliver out. So it's not just about what they want in terms of like, in terms of a personal side of whether it's fear, whether it's control, whether it's some kind of anxiety, right? It's also about what's being demanded of them in terms of the answers they have to give going up the ladder, right? And well, it's levels of separation, right?
I'm not sure. I mean, maybe then let's touch on this a little bit more, because the answer is, when will my story be done? In 2 weeks. If your sprint is 2 weeks long, your story should be done in and delivered in 2 weeks' time. Maybe you're lucky and maybe it's delivered before that, but you're subscribing to say, this is what I'm doing in 2 weeks. If the question is, when will this initiative be done, or when will this theme be done, or when will this epic be done, that's a function of story points and velocity. And you can reorder the backlog to change the date at which something will be delivered, because it's unlikely that you're just working on one theme all the way through and then you switch to another theme all the way through and all the way through. So I don't understand why someone would need to know on a story basis, how long is this going to take? The answer is 2 weeks. And on a project basis, why do I need to equate each story to time if I can do this forecasting using the backlog and our velocity? So am I simplifying it too much here?
Let's give Lucy a chance to jump in.
I'm having I don't have the same experience as you have, guys. Of course, while listening to you, one of the things that I think control is a big issue in every work. Many people need that to have a sense of control. No, time can be time is something that is tangible. Kind of tangible, that provides the person having this sense of control. At the same time, maybe people feel confident. That creates them to feel more confident of what they are doing. And also, I think, I don't know, maybe I'm confused, but maybe that's the way that our minds kind of think of, in linear time. We need, I don't know, so many days to do this, and maybe shifting to the other, shifting to another mindset. Maybe that's when they struggle a bit and they come back to what's more what people know better, which is and they are more accustomed to, which is time. But I don't know if this is relevant to what you've said.
I think, I mean, I agree. It probably is a factor of all of that, but in my experience, it's so that someone can look at it and say, I disagree with your estimate. And people find it hard to disagree with your estimate if they don't take the time to understand your velocity and your story points. That's generally why I see people asking for time on stories.
Which one do this is a question. Is one of those is one approach more effective than the other one, or they complement each other? Why do I mean?
I think the reason the analogy I always used was riddles, right? So if someone asks you how long it's going to take you to solve a riddle, you can't really tell them how long it's going to take because you don't know if you're going to have a moment of inspiration or not, right? And like seeing coding as creative work, what you can say about a riddle is that this is a very difficult one, and you can estimate generally how long it takes you to do difficult ones, and then over estimates and over time you can get kind of a good estimation in numbers, but in a singular case you can't. And because I think a lot of the work that agile teams do in terms of software development is very similar to riddles, right? It's kind of, especially if you're like defect handling or debugging or something, that's the best way to kind of understand why we have to go by complexity and how difficult it is and not how quickly I'm going to be able to get it done, because
plenty more to unpack on this subject, no doubt, but I think we've probably reached our time here, right? Cool. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. If you have an opinion, if you've heard any more absurd ideas or falsehoods about story point estimation, maybe leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you again sometime soon.